Welcome back, everybody, to another week of Sunday School here at the Lighthouse Church of the Nazarene in Moravia, Iowa, where we're going through the book of 2 Kings. This week, we're in 2 Kings chapter 24. This is the end. We're coming down to the end. God's said, you know what? I've had enough of you people. I'm doing away with you. I've given you some 400 years to get your act together, and you still haven't got it right. So where do we off? We're going to actually pick up at the end of chapter 23, just because I want to show you some things real quick. So when we left off, in chapter 23, we had Josiah as king, but Josiah had just been killed because of a foolish error of going into battle against Pharaoh Necho, the king of Egypt. So Josiah, the best king that Israel had, he was dead at the age of 39. The one thing we can come up with about Josiah is Josiah had all these reforms. He kept the Passover, he redid the temple, he reinstated the law, but you can clean out the outside all you want, but unless it's a change of the heart, it really doesn't do you any good. Jesus, he referred to the Pharisees as whitewashed tombs. You look beautiful on the outside, but inside, you're full of dead men's bones and all uncleanness. The Apostle Paul, I believe it's in Romans chapter 2, he said, you are not a Jew who is one outwardly, and circumcision is not of the flesh, but you are a Jew who is one inwardly, and circumcision is of the heart. So it's a change of heart that comes about. We can clean up the outside all we want, but it's on the inside that counts. So I want to pick this up, 2 Kings chapter 23, verse 31. Josiah has just died, and now Josiah's first son that he's going to have on the throne is going to come in here. So we're just going to breeze through this real quick. 2 Kings chapter 23, verse 31. Josiah has just died. Now this is his son. Jehoahaz was 23 years old when he became king, and he reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. Remember that name right there. It's going to come into play later in chapter 24. So Jehoahaz, his mother was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his fathers had done. Now Pharaoh Necho put him in prison at Riblah in the land of Hamath, that he might not reign in Jerusalem. And he imposed on the land a tribute of 100 talents of silver and talents of gold. I just wanted to go back to chapter 23 to show you who is in control right now. Pharaoh Necho, the king of Egypt, he actually came up and just put Jehoahaz in prison and put a tax on the land. So who's in control? The king of Egypt is in control right now. Verse 34. Then Pharaoh Necho made Eliakim, the son of Josiah, king in place of his father Josiah, and changed his name to Jehoiakim. So Pharaoh Necho then, he gets rid of Jehoahaz, and then he puts Jehoahaz's brother Jehoiakim on the throne and changes his name. Why did he change his name? Probably just because he could. Probably to show him who is in power. So we now have 2 sons of Josiah on the throne right here. So now Jehoiakim is on the throne. He was put there by the king of Egypt. Verse 35. So Jehoiakim gave the silver and gold to Pharaoh, the tax that the Pharaoh king of Egypt put on the land. But he taxed the land to give money according to the command of Pharaoh. He exalted the silver and gold from the people of the land, from everyone according to his assessment, to give it to Pharaoh Necho. Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Zebudah, the daughter of Pedaiah of Rumah. It's interesting. These 2 sons of Josiah, they had different moms. What does that tell us? It tells us that Josiah had multiple wives. As good as he was, he also had his shortcomings because the kings were commanded not to multiply their wives. Verse 37, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord according to all that his fathers had done. All right, so the king of Egypt, he's the one putting kings on the throne, putting kings in Jerusalem in prison. Now let's go to 2 Kings chapter 24, where I wanted to start. 2 Kings chapter 24. In his days, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became his vassal for 3 years. What just happened here? It was the king of Egypt doing everything in there, and all of a sudden it says Nebuchadnezzar came up, and he put Jehoiakim under his control. Now, what just happened here? We had a changing of world powers between the end of chapter 23 and the beginning of chapter 24. Assyria and Egypt, they were allies together. They have now diminished, and now Babylon, they are the main empire of the world right now. They are the world power. So Nebuchadnezzar came up and put Jehoiakim under his control. This is also when Daniel and his friends and all his other ones, this is when they went to Babylon. That happened right here. Because if you go to Daniel 1:1, it says, in the 3rd year in the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar came to Babylon and besieged it. So this right here, I actually have it written in my Bible, verse right here at chapter 24. Daniel gets taken here. This is the first wave of deportation of the men of Judah going to Babylon. So now Daniel and all his friends, they're over in Babylon with the other brightest. The interesting thing, I need to move on or we're going to be here all day. The interesting thing, back when the Babylonian envoys came to Hezekiah in 2 Kings chapter 20, and Hezekiah showed the Babylonians everything he had, what did Isaiah the prophet tell him? He says, you shouldn't have done that, because these men, they're going to come and they're going to take away all your stuff, and they're also going to come and take away your best men and make them eunuchs in their palace. Happened just like Isaiah prophesied, and that's what happened right here. All right, we got to move. Verse 2, and the Lord sent against him raiding band of Chaldeans. Who are the Chaldeans? These are people from Babylon. Abraham was from Ur of the Chaldeans. This is, it's also known as the Fertile Crescent, Mesopotamia. It's also known by that name. The land between two rivers, it's the Tigris and the Euphrates River. That's what the Chaldeans here, if you didn't know that. So the Lord sent against him raiding band of Chaldeans, bands of Syrians, bands of Moabites, and bands of the people of Ammon. He sent them against Judah to destroy it according to the word of the Lord which he had spoken by his servants the prophets. Now, God is actually using these evil people as his instruments of judgment. It's interesting. Quite a few times throughout Scripture, Nebuchadnezzar, God refers to Nebuchadnezzar as his servant. These people, they were no more righteous than the evil king Jehoiakim, but God was using them as his instruments of judgment, which makes you wonder. You wonder how often today does God use evil men as his servants? All right, so where are we at here? Verse 3. Surely at the commandment of the Lord, this came upon Judah to remove them from his sight because of the sins of Manasseh. Remember that, because of the sins of Manasseh, according to all that he had done, and also because of the innocent blood that had shed, for he had filled Jerusalem with innocent blood, which the Lord would not pardon. Now this is interesting. He says it's because of the sins of Manasseh. Manasseh hasn't been on the throne for some 60 years now, but notice the effects of Manasseh's sins. Manasseh, he's lived and died already. He's gone. He actually repented of his sins. God forgave him, but the effects of his sin are still there. This is probably where we can take of, in the 10 Commandments, Exodus 20, verse 5, God says, for I, the Lord, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the 3rd and 4th generations of those who hate me, but mercy to the thousands of those who love me. I think what we can take away from this is God deals with each generation in its own sins, but sadly, each generation learns their sins from the previous generation. Do they not? So, God says, because of all the sins of Manasseh, but it was because of the sins of all the kings. Remember, there was 20 kings total, and there was only 8 good ones. So, verse 5. Now, the rest of the acts of Jehoiakim and all that he did, are they not written in the books of the chronicles of the king of Judah? So Jehoiakim rested with his fathers. Then Jehoiachin, his son, was raised in his place. And the king of Egypt did not come out of the land anymore, for the king of Babylon had taken all that belonged to the king of Egypt from the brook of Egypt to the river Euphrates. So they don't tell us much more about Jehoiakim's reign here in 2 Kings. But if we read 2 Chronicles and the book of Jeremiah, we know that he was actually a very evil king. What else did he do? He actually murdered somebody called Uriah the prophet. Uriah the prophet was speaking against him and went to Egypt. And the King Jehoiakim actually sent for somebody to bring Uriah back, and he killed Uriah the prophet. Uriah the prophet, he's kind of a little-known prophet through the Bible. What else did he do? Jeremiah actually sent a scroll of what God told Jeremiah to King Jehoiakim. And what did he do? This is in Jeremiah chapter 36. Jehoiakim just sits there and keeps slicing off some of the time and throwing it in the fire. He wouldn't have anything to do with this. They also don't say much else about the death of Jehoiakim, but from the book of Jeremiah and 2 Chronicles, we know that he was actually carried away to Babylon with his family, and he didn't die a good death there, and he didn't get a proper burial there either. But we don't get all those details in 2 Kings. But Jehoiakim is now gone. So we've had a couple kings already. We've had Jehoiaz, a son of Josiah. We've then had his half-brother, another son of Josiah, Jehoiakim. And now we got Jehoiakim's son, Jehoiachin. So this is a grandson of Josiah. Is everybody following? I know it's a lot of names. We don't need to remember all the names, just as long as we get the good points here. So verse 8, Jehoiachin, grandson of Josiah here, was 18 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem for 3 months. His mother's name was Nehushta, the daughter of Elonathan of Jerusalem. If there's any biblical scholars that are actually listening to this that really like these details, that Elnathan of Jerusalem, he's actually the one that Jehoiakim sent to get Uriah the prophet to bring him back. Just an obscure little thing in the Bible here. So verse 9, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord according to all that his father had done. At that time, the servants of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up against Jerusalem, and the city was besieged. And Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up against the city as his servants were besieging it. Then Jehoiachin, king of Judah, his mother, his servants, his princes, and his officers went out to the king of Babylon. And the king of Babylon, in the 8th year of his reign, took him prisoner. Now, I have it wrote in my Bible that Ezekiel gets taken here, because if you go to Ezekiel chapter 1, it says he was taken captivity during the reign of Jehoiachin. Now, what's interesting is Jehoiachin here. He actually goes by many names in the Bible. He's also known as Jeconiah, and he's actually also known as Coniah. And there's something that a lot of people know about the curse of Jeconiah, where Jeremiah says, "Mark this man down as childless. He won't have a son on the reign, or he won't have a son on the throne to reign." That's just something you'll have to study on your own, the curse of Jeconiah, because I really don't even understand it well myself. But anyway, Jehoiachin, instead of having the city suffer and starving them all out, what does he do? He just says, okay, you can have it. He surrenders right here. So Ezekiel gets taken here. Jehoiachin, he just gives up the city, says, we're not going to go through this. Verse 13, and he carried out from there, this is Nebuchadnezzar, all the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king's house, and he cut in pieces all the articles of gold which Solomon king of Israel had made in the temple of the Lord, as the Lord had said. What does Nebuchadnezzar do? Comes and takes all the gold out of the city, all the gold out of the temple, all the silver and gold instruments that were the articles of gold that were in the king's house. Here's a pop quiz for you. When will these articles, cups and stuff, the articles of gold from the temple, when will they show back up? They'll show back up in Daniel chapter 5 in Belshazzar's feast. When Belshazzar was having a feast and he says, hey, bring out the royal glasses from Jerusalem. And then that's when the handwriting on the wall, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. So those things will show up again in Daniel chapter 5 in Belshazzar's feast. One other thing we have to ask about. What about the Ark of the Covenant? The Ark of the Covenant. When did we last see it? We actually last see it. 2 Chronicles gives us this detail. It says when Josiah kept the Passover, that is when that they actually brought the Ark of the Covenant back into the temple. We don't know where it was in between all that time when Solomon had it in the temple. At some point, the priest must have taken it away. But during Josiah's Passover, the Ark of the Covenant comes back in. But now, nobody knows where the Ark of the Covenant is. Jewish tradition has it that Jeremiah knew the Babylonians were coming and that Jeremiah actually hid the Ark of the Covenant somewhere. But we don't know. So anyway, Nebuchadnezzar, he's taken all the gold back to Babylon right there. Verse 14. Also he carried into captivity all Jerusalem, all the captains and all the mighty men of valor. 10,000 captives. So not only did Nebuchadnezzar take back all the articles of gold, he also brought back 10,000 people with him. This is now the second wave of deportation of the Babylonian captivity. And all the craftsmen and the smiths. None remained except the poorest of the land. Now, why would they do that? They would leave the poorest of the land to farm the fields for food to keep the land up. And they also would assume that the poorest of the land wouldn't rise up in revolt. You know, most of the time, the poorest of the land, they're just fighting for their next meal. So that's all they're worried about. Verse 15, and he carried Jehoiachin captive to Babylon, the king's mother, the king's wives, his officers, and the mighty of that land he carried into captivity from Jerusalem to Babylon. How long of a distance was that? 900 miles from Jerusalem to Babylon that these people would have had to travel back there. So, verse 16, all the valiant men, 7,000, and craftsmen and smiths, 1,000, all who were strong and fit for war, these the king of Babylon brought captive to Babylon. Verse 17, then the king of Babylon made Mattaniah, Jehoiachin's uncle, king in his place, and changed his name to Zedekiah. Now this is interesting. This is Jehoiachin's uncle. This is now Josiah's third son to sit on the throne in Judah, in Jerusalem here. Josiah had 3 sons sit on the throne. Notice that the king of Babylon also changed his name from Mattaniah to Zedekiah. Verse 18, Zedekiah was 21 years old when he became king, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. This makes him a full brother to Jehoias. Remember when we started? We're in chapter 23, I believe, verse 31 right there. And as Jehoias, when it said his mother, I said, remember that name? Because there's the same woman right here. So Zedekiah, he's a full brother to Jehoias, who was sitting on the throne earlier. Verse 19, he also did evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that Jehoiakim did. What did all the evil he did? We'll get into that next week in chapter 25. For because of the anger of the Lord, this happened in Jerusalem, that he finally cast them out from his presence. Then Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Israel. So, we now have Zedekiah on the throne. This is the last king of Judah right here. The Babylonians are about to come against Jerusalem, besiege it, starve them out. Zedekiah, it's not going to go good for him next week when we're in chapter 25. So, we're done for this week. A couple main points. What's the main point? First, rebellion against the plain and evident will of God will always be foolish. Do you know that Jeremiah was having mercy on them and actually told them, Jeremiah said, by the word of God, surrender to these Babylonians, go with them, and you'll be able to remain in your land, and everything will be okay. But they would not listen to Jeremiah the prophet. They rebelled against that, and that was their downfall. The other thing is, Hebrews 12 says, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, the discipline of the Lord. For whom the Lord loves, he corrects. Could God just keep allowing his people to keep going on sinning and worshiping other gods and be a loving father to them? No, absolutely not. As a loving father is concerned for his children, God watches over us to correct us when we start to stray also, does he not? If you can sin and get by with it and not feel any remorse or rebuke from God, you should be concerned. Anyway, we're done for this week. 2 Kings chapter 24. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you the same time, same place next week. Bye.